Hey, is everybody here?
Yes.
Great. Um, my name is Katherine Kitterman, and I am the Historical Director at Better Days 2020 and co-author of Champions of Change, 25 Women Who Made History. Naomi Watkins is my co-author, excuse me, and she joins us here today, as well as Brooke Smart, the illustrator. And we're really excited to talk to you about the process of the book and about how it came together and what we learned while doing it. So thanks again for joining us. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments below. So first off, I just want to talk about why we put this book together in the first place. This is a big year for women and voting rights in the United States. So this is the 19th Amendment anniversary this year. 100 years ago is when the 19th Amendment passed, and that extended voting rights to women citizens across the country. And that wasn't the beginning or the end of the story for having women have a say in politics and public life and being involved in our communities. So one of the anniversaries that we're celebrating this year is Utah's 150th anniversary of women getting the right to vote. And another anniversary is the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, which was almost 100 years later in 1965, which was one of the major pieces of legislation that allowed women of color to cast ballots across the country. So as we were thinking about how to talk to kids and adults about this story and to learn about the strong women who have made those big important changes happen and who have made our community better in so many other ways, we picked a couple of women to highlight. And there are some of the women that we've worked on are in this book, and there are many, many more that we can learn from. But I'm just going to read a little note from the introduction very quickly, and then we'll kick it over to some of our others to talk about what we learned about when we were coming up with this book. So as I mentioned before, the fight for women's voting rights was just one step in a long list of rights that had to be won. Now I'm going to read from our introduction here. Even before the passage of the 19th Amendment, and especially since, both women and men have worked to improve their communities in the arts, business, education, law, medicine, military, music, writing, politics, religious and community organizations, science, sports, and more. This book also includes women who worked throughout the 20th century to open doors and advance their communities. Champions are not reserved for the firsts and onlys. The seconds and thirds and 33rds and so on, ripple effects of the first, are equally important. So who are your heroes? How will you honor their stories? How will you contribute? And how will you tell your story? We can't wait to see. And those are some of the questions that we hope you'll think of when you're reading this book. So now I'm going to turn it over to Naomi Watkins to talk about the process of coming up with the illustrations and biographies. And then we'll hear from Brooke Smart about her process of illustrating these important women.
Hi, everybody. So as a girl, when I was growing up, I grew up in Southern California near the beach, and I didn't learn about women when I was in school. I learned about a few people people you probably already know, like Rosa Parks or Martha Washington, Amelia Earhart, some really important women, but I never learned about a wide variety of women, and I didn't learn about women who were from California. Of course, I knew about actresses, but I didn't know about anybody who was like an activist or, who was busy doing things in the early history of the state. So I'm an educator, and when I was thinking about ways to educate kids and adults about the different women in Utah history, my mind immediately turned to illustration. So, if you've seen our book, which now is covered by pizza, I can't show it to you, but the faults of like these weird Zoom backgrounds, you disappear. It was really important to me that pictures could tell the stories of women. And so that's when we found Brooke Smart, who you'll hear from in a second. But I really had this vision of 50 illustrations of women from Utah who were representative of a lot of different backgrounds, because we tend to hear about just a few women, if we know of any women who are from Utah. And I wanted this to really be representative of the people who live in Utah now and the people who used to live in Utah in the past. So we did a lot of research identifying women, working with various communities in Utah, talking to them about women who made an impact in their communities, who made an impact on their personal lives. And our requirement was that not only did they have to make a big impact, but they also needed to be deceased. So everyone in our book is dead. And so the biggest problem that we had was narrowing it down to 50, which is a really good problem to have, right? That we had more than 50 women that we could have included in this project. And as Katherine stated, there's only 25 of those 50 in Champions of Change. So we worked with historians and scholars and identified and found family descendants of a lot of these people who are in the book to learn more information about them, to gather photographs to help Brooke with the illustrations. And I know personally, it's been really gratifying and really cool to learn about these women, to realize that they were working and fighting for issues that are still important to us now, things like clean air, public health, which is a really important thing happening right now as we're taping this interview with us. You know, working for getting women in public office, working for the vote. So these are things, you know, issues and things that we still talk about now. And I really find that it's cool to know about these new heroes. I have a lot of women I can now look to as mentors from the past.
Awesome. So Brooke, tell us a little bit about your process. Oh, sorry.
That's good. So my name is Brooke Smart, and I'm an illustrator, also living in Utah, and I do a lot of children's illustration, or often illustrations about really cool women from history. And so this was such a great project for me to work on, such a good fit because I'm so interested in learning about these women myself. Like Naomi said, as we did research and we learned about these women, I found myself with so many new heroes in my own life, teaching me how to do brave things, how to tackle projects that seem very daunting, how to just overcome problems that are maybe in our path, especially as women. And so each illustration was a little bit different with the process, but this great team, Naomi and Katherine, that helped a lot, helping me with the research beforehand. Like Naomi said, looking for photographs, trying to find family members that maybe had information on the different women that I was illustrating. And so I would do, I did a lot of my illustrations I do things kind of backward from a lot of illustrators, but I sketch everything digitally, and then I paint everything with watercolor and gouache by hand. So a great part about working digitally in the sketch phase is that I can pull all kinds of, information into my sketch, photographs, journal pages. I can pull it all in and kind of make a collage in there as I'm working. And so I can just, I can work through the layers. I was going to show maybe one of my sketches. Maybe I will in just a minute. But I wanted to talk about the first one that I worked on with Better Days. I'm going to hold up the card of Emmeline. Here's a card. Here's a print of it. So the actual illustration is kind of somewhere in between those two sizes. But the card might be easier to see some details. So this is Emmeline B. Wells. She was a leading suffragist of her time, probably our most famous suffragist in Utah. Something very unique about her was that she was very small, but she was very feisty and she knew what she wanted. And something that really helped as the first illustration, it was such a great one to start with because we had so much information about her. We didn't really work with any living relatives of hers, but we had so many journals. She was a writer, so we had all these journals that told me a lot about her personal life, her thoughts, her feelings, and I love to include that along with the historical facts into each of these illustrations just to bring it a more personal touch, to bring them to life. We wanted to tell we didn't want to just paint a static portrait of each of these women, because that's kind of what we have with the black and white photographs that we started with a lot of them. But we wanted to tell their whole story in the portrait. So to tell her story, she was a small woman, and she was the editor at the Woman's Exponent, which was one of the longest running women's rights newspapers in the US. She was the editor there for 40 years. So I wanted to include some of the Women's Exponent papers in her hand, as well as a pen that would have been used at that time, a quill. Her Everything about her outfit, her hair, even the type of jewelry she wore. We had to research what would be appropriate at the time, color-wise. Different hair fashions were appropriate for different aged women. So we had to really research what would be appropriate for her to be wearing. So since she was wearing such a kind of drab brown color, which was kind of appropriate for her time period, I wanted to bring the rest of the illustration to life with color. And I have her overlooking Salt Lake City, because that's where she did a lot of her work. And then I have her in a field of wheat, and that's symbolic. Every part of the illustration tells part of their story. I wanted every part of it, why is she standing in wheat? Why is she holding that thing? Wanted it to all contribute to the story. So the reason she's standing in this field of wheat is because when she was the 5th Relief Society president for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And during her time, during World War I, she oversaw its grain saving project, which they grew enough grain to sell 200,000 bushels of wheat to the U.S. government during the war. And so I think that was her biggest project as a Relief Society president, as a leader in that community. And so I really wanted to show her in the wheat there. She also really hated the color purple, but she really loved these purple earrings. And so those are the kind of personal details that I like to include, because maybe it doesn't tell about her accomplishments in life, but it tells who she is. And that's so nice to have alongside these beautiful black and white photos that we have of her. We're able to kind of tell that story, and maybe that's something that you would connect with, I just love wearing my purple earrings too. So yeah, that's how it usually worked. So the illustrations themselves are in a traveling show for, I guess, the next couple years. And you're able to see them. They're more maybe the size of a printer paper or smaller. But I started with these sketches. We were able to get a lot of feedback from living family members on a lot of these women, and to create that really personal touch. They gave us some really helpful feedback and brought these women to life. Yeah.
I love that. Thanks, Brooke, for sharing. Did you want to show us anything on your iPad about how you sketched and then turned your initial ideas into reality?
Yes. I'm pulling up. So I can't find Emmeline's, but I will pull up another one. Let's see.
One of the things that I loved that Brooke did is that when we were working with family members or scholars, historians, community leaders, we would always send those sketches to those people who were part of that community or part of that family to give feedback. And I know lots of times they had some specific ideas about things that should or shouldn't be included, or ideas about what colors their ancestors loved to wear. And Brooke was so great about including those and working with them to make sure that the sketch really represented something that felt authentic to them before we went ahead and that you painted it in color.
Yeah, that was very, very helpful. Sometimes we would work with, Katherine is herself a very gifted historian, but we would sometimes work with very specific historians. This is one, let's see, I can kind of show you on my iPad here. This was Ellen Selu, or Mama Selu. And even down to the details. Let's see if I can get the sketch. So I would just work, is that showing up?
Yeah.
I usually just work with these layers, and I can make the layers kind of come and go as needed.
So you can have those images there right as you're sketching.
Yeah. So let's see. So there's my sketch that I had of Ellen. It's maybe a little bit hard to see. And then I would pull up photographs of her. Should have had a better format for showing this. But as you can see, I have all these different photos, and then, I wanted to get all of the details of the illustration correct. And so even, this flower that's in her hair in the sketch, I wanted to make sure I'm getting the color right, getting the type of flower to be totally correct. We worked with someone that kind of has done research on what kind of flowers would be appropriate for that, for where she's from. This is the statue in Yosepa where she did, that she was connected to. We're able to see, let's see, I think in her illustration, if I can get rid of some of these, you're able to see a photo. Oops. A photo of that same statue that she would talk about on her radio show. And you can kind of see that there in the background. You can see it there, right there. So we wanted, again, to have all of the details be very accurate to that person, to where they're from, their culture. We worked with all of the tribes in Utah, and we wanted everything from the tribes to be very accurate. And so it's very helpful for me to work this way, because then I can kind of have everything at my fingertips and be able to make sure everything, right next to each other is accurate, and telling the story the way that we want to tell their story in the most accurate way.
Well, and Brooke, one of the things I love about your illustrations is that they do really bring these women to life. It's more colorful and vivid and engaging than a black and white photograph sometimes, which is what we have for these women. But it's not just the color, but it's the style and the heart that you've put into this, that you can really get the sense of a woman's story and who she was and what drove her and what she cared about. And I think that's a really great addition. And it's not just an addition to their story, but it tells their story in such a meaningful way. I think that's really neat. So
thank you.
So fun working with you on this. Why don't we go over to Naomi to talk about one of her favorite people that we featured, both the illustration and the story, and just give you a little sneak peek for some of the women that are in this book.
So one of my favorite women is Annie Dodge Wanika, and I feel like her story is so timely to what we're going through right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you, oh, here we go. So you can kind of see Annie. I know, my pizza background is not working. But a little bit about Annie Dodge Wanika, that she was born and lived on the Navajo Nation, and during the 1918 flu pandemic, which swept through the United States and across the world, many of her Navajo friends and family died from the flu. And Annie cared for a lot of these people as a young girl, and really that was the catalyst for her being interested in public health, because she saw that there was such a great need on the Navajo Nation, and she felt that education and leadership was a great way to improve the public health on the Navajo Nation. So Annie went to school and got a public health degree. She then also ran to be a member of the Navajo Nation's Tribal Council. And so when she did that, she was in a position to use her education and to be a mouthpiece for public health issues. So she worked on things like, she chaired the Tribal Health Committee. She launched different public health campaigns about clean drinking water, alcoholism, influenza, tuberculosis. And she also was consulted nationally. So she didn't just do this work on the Navajo Nation. She really worked with Western medicine and the Navajo healers to create partnerships and to build trust, so that the Navajos would get the help that they needed, but also be able to affirm their traditional ways. She created this English to Navajo medical dictionary because a lot of Western medicine terms, they didn't have words for those in Navajo. And so she created this dictionary, which you can see flashing at you in the pizza, and the illustration that Brooke did. She had her own radio show, just like Mama Selu, who Brooke just talked about. Annie broadcasted it in the Navajo language, talking about different public health issues, much like we're seeing on the news today, telling us to wash our hands with soap and water and to make sure that we don't cough on people and we stay 6 feet away. That was the information that she would share on her radio show. And she worked with the U.S. Surgeon General, different national boards about public health. She's won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I also love that she was a Girl Scout leader, so she was helping girls sell cookies and get badges. So she was really, connected to not just the people on the Navajo Nation, but also within the broader community. So I really feel like Annie is a great person to look at as we are, faced with the same public health issue now. I don't know, Brooke, if you want to talk anything about Annie's illustration at all, things you added or details.
Sure. Let me pull it up. Let's see.
And I've got her on my screen as well, so you can see it.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Yeah, so we went back and forth because we actually did have Mama Selu, who also had a radio show. So at first I sketched her in her radio booth, but we wanted to make her story really tell the whole story of who she was. So we did have her kind of in front of some structures where her tribe lived, and we had her with a very specific necklace. We had to, figure out exactly which one would be most important and specific to her, which one had the most meaning to her. And then again, there's the her medal that she's wearing that Naomi talked about. But her jewelry is very specific to her tribe, to the Navajo tribe. And so every detail kind of told who she was, what was important to her, who her people are, what her background is. And then, yeah, like Naomi talked about, we didn't actually have a photo of her English to Navajo medical dictionary. And so I did have to make up that detail, but it was such an important detail of who she was that it needed to be in there. So sometimes we would do as much research as we could and we still couldn't find photographs of things. So we had to kind of go off of descriptions, and that was very helpful. But sometimes I had to make some things up a little bit. But for the most part, we tried to keep everything very, very accurate to the time, to that person, to their tribe, to whatever background they're from. Yeah, and so she is such an important leader to follow right now, such an important example of caring for her community, just like we need to care for each other right now during this global pandemic. So yeah, such an interesting, wonderful person to look up to.
Yeah, Annie's story is was really meaningful to me. I hadn't known it, but she ended up where she died was in my hometown, and so that gave me a little sense of connection to her. But her story is so meaningful, again, of finding the thing that you care about and finding a way to make a difference. All of these women that we have featured had different interests and different strengths and talents and different problems that they wanted to solve. So some were involved in public health or worked as doctors or medicine, that some women really pushed for getting the right to vote and having women be involved in politics, and others were business women or educators or leaders in other fields. And I love that throughout the pages of this book and throughout all of the women that we featured in our project overall, that you get a sense of the variety and diversity of the things that women have done and the ways that they have made our own community so much better and richer. And I just love that there's so much more to learn, so many more heroes. I'm just going to talk very briefly about one last person who's in the book really quickly, and then we'll show you some cards and we can have Brooke pull up those other illustrations. But I'm going to talk to you really quickly about Alice Kasai, who is one of my favorite women in the book, also one of my favorite illustrations. She was a Utahn who was living in Salt Lake City in the Avenues with her husband when World War II broke out. And Alice was Japanese American and her husband had been born in Japan. He was a community leader among Japanese Americans in Salt Lake City, and so he was taken to an internment camp during the war when the US government rounded up a lot of Japanese Americans and Japanese who were living in the United States. And that was a really stinky situation. That was not something that was good for Alice and her family or her community. And she rose to leadership during that time to try to make that better. She worked with the Japanese American Citizens League to try to improve the situation for people in the camps, to try to win their release and get them home. And then after the war, Alice was really committed to fostering international peace and cultural understanding. So she helped to create student exchange programs and sister city programs. She worked to create a Japanese section in the International Peace Gardens in Salt Lake. And you can see some of the things that she's wearing here. She's got a medal for her service with the Japanese American Citizens League that Brooke put in. She's got a chapter that she wrote about Japanese American life in Utah, and she's pictured in this garden where she did so much work. But one of the things that I love about Alice is that she turned a very difficult and unfair situation into an opportunity to build understanding and peace. And she's another one of my heroes who I didn't know about before this project, but who I've really grown to love, both through my own research and through Brooke's illustration that really brings her to life. So there's a lot more stories of women in this book and others that we could tell, but we just wanted to give you a little taste of some of the people that you can meet and our thought process in putting this together. And as we've learned about these women and talked with their family members, it's been such an important thing to me as a Utahn now to see the people who have come before me and the people who have shaped the community where I live today. I think that really makes me think differently about my voice and what I want to do as a citizen and what I can do to make my community a better place. So did you want to just show off a couple of the other illustrations in those cards that we have?
Sure, yes. Okay. Someone that is very important to Utah is Martha Hughes Cannon, who was our first female state senator, and actually the first female state senator in all of the United States. She ran against her husband and won. And she's a very iconic figure in Utah and will be featured as a statue in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., along with Brigham Young. So there are two statues of people represented from each state in the United States, and she will join a very small number of women that are included in that collection, and hopefully there will be more women to follow. Let's see.
Yeah, let's do one more.
What?
Let's do one more. That's great.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Can you see?
Yes.
This is Lucille Bankhead. This is actually one of my favorite illustrations from the collection. But I'm not sure if she's in the book. But
great show.
She was actually, not a very notable person in Utah, but she wanted to make a difference. And she led members of her art and craft club to the Capitol to sit in and lobby against a law that would force Black residents to move from their homes to a disintegrated, segregated Black district in Salt Lake City. So she just decided that was something that she wanted to fight against, and she took the action with her friends and just a craft group. And so she's such an example because she shows that you don't have to be anyone important. You don't have to be a state senator. You don't have to be a well-known figure in your community, but you can be a leader when you know that what you're fighting for is right. And she even carried her little baby with her, and so it shows that even, sometimes we feel like I'm a young mom and I am so busy, with my domestic routine that I can't get out and do things that are important in my community, but you can. And sometimes that involves bringing your children with you. And I think that's actually a great thing to do. It shows your children that you can make a difference, and you're an example to them of that by including them in that. Yeah, so there are 25 of our illustrations in the book, and then all 50 of them that we did are in this card set that Better Days 2020 sells on their website.
Yeah, I just love that those illustrations are getting out there. Lucille is one of my favorite stories as well. I'm going to give you a little information at the end about where to find the book and the cards if you're interested. But Naomi, do you have any last words for us?
I just want to say that if you're not in Utah, these stories I think are still pertinent to you. I think these women's stories are universal, but I think it also speaks to learning about the women who have built the community wherever it is that you lived, and to be looking for the leaders right now. It can be you, it could be, well, I hope it's you, right? It could be your friend, it could be somebody who reaches out to you if you're feeling lonely during this time, or if you're feeling sad. I mean, all those things are feelings that these women and other women and people of the past have felt, which I think brings comfort to me going through difficult things. So I hope that if you're not in Utah, that you still have a touchstone to this book, because I think regardless of where certain women live, their stories are still universal to where we are.
Thanks. I think we can all use great examples of leadership and perseverance and so many other values and characteristics that these women portrayed in their lives. So with that, I'll just put in another plug for this book. It's called Champions of Change, 25 Women Who Made History. It's available at local bookstores and also through the publisher, Gibbs Smith. So if you go to gibbs-smith.com, you can order it there, and it's currently on sale. So it's a good time to get it. You can also find the illustrations and trading cards and posters of these illustrations available at UtahWomen'sHistory.org, where you can scroll through all 50 and take a look as well. So again, if you have any questions, reach out to us in the comments, and thanks for joining us today.
Bye.